everybody. Hi, I'm Ken Phelan. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Gotham Technology Group, and I've got Michael Leland with me today from Island. We're going to talk about corporate browsers, what their uses are, and some of the things that we're seeing in that space, which I'm very excited about. Michael, maybe just introduce yourself quickly and talk about your background.
Sure. Thanks, Ken. So I serve as the field CTO here at Island. I've been here about 6 months. Prior to coming to Island, I was chief evangelist and XDR strategy officer at SentinelOne, one of the leading EDR vendors. And before that, I was co-founder and CTO of a company called Nitro Security. We built a SIM that got acquired by McAfee in 2011. So SecOps, network operations, network security has kind of been in my lifeblood for the better part of 30 years. I actually got my start at a small company called Cabletron Systems, for those old enough in the audience to remember them. Small little networking vendor based in Rochester, New Hampshire. I live in Portsmouth, New Hampshire now.
Nice, nice. Well, I like meeting people. I'm pretty old too, so I guess I've been kicking around this space a while. And I think I saw you also at McAfee, all these things, and it's kind of interesting, like seeing this motion, in your career and in the industry of, figuring out how to stop individual problems in EDR and this and that, whatever. And along comes, the sort of corporate browser thing, right? That sort of sits in front of like this big problem, which is the things coming through the browser. And I call it like the fat, dumb, and happy architectures. Like the things that just stop things because of how they are and who they are. Like you're not like, McAfee had to know every virus scan, whatever. Do you, having lived through all of that, being here, like how do you see that progression? How do were you frustrated before? Do you love it now? Is it, it's a
So I think it's interesting, in the days of an EDR or a McAfee or any other vendor that's really addressing kind of network security, cloud security. So many times we're looking for atomic indicators, right? Singular things that are bad. But I think the adversarial threat landscape has gotten so evolved that it's not just one thing that's bad. It's a pattern of behavior that's bad, and it's not always the adversary that's doing it, right? We've got insider threats, whether they're malicious or unintentional. Just simple education of how users treat corporate data, um, leading it up to the standard end user to know when and where he should copy and paste data. It completely goes around all of the DLP compensating controls we've been putting in. Where we were forced along these paths of, I like to think of it as like the nesting Russian doll, right? You've got to go through your proxy, then you got to break and inspect, then you're going to do your DLP, and then your web categorization. And I think with cryptography where it is now too, and the algorithms that people are using, it's no longer possible to break and inspect everything. Then you look at the user experience side of things, and it was never everything the security team did. Always added obstacles. They always added road bumps or friction to the end user experience, right? Every time you have to stop traffic, break and inspect, do those things, you're adding latency and performance characteristics that aren't amenable to the consumer. We like to say that there's two end users we want to keep really happy. One is the one sitting in front of the glass, the one that's actually utilizing the application of a browser to access corporate data safely and securely. But the other user we want to keep incredibly happy is the IT staff, right? The admins who have to configure policy and roll it out and push it out en masse. And I think the challenge we've been faced with as an industry is small vendors pop up that solve one niche problem. And if you can afford it, you go and you buy one of those and you try to integrate it with your existing stack. And tech debt increases because you've never properly integrated it entirely to your CI/CD pipeline or your infrastructure. And so we've just stacked this set of legacy technology. Every time we do that, we're adding complexity. Complexity is the enemy of cybersecurity and IT operations. And I just think we needed a better way of reimagining the way we both deliver infrastructure in support of these applications, as well as the user experience of those applications with key stakeholders in mind: the CISO, the CIO, and the end user at every stage.
No, it's totally true. One of the metaphors I use is I think we're greatest in industry is like, it's in the news, it's on CNN. We got shot in the shoulder last week. And so we start selling everybody these giant plates of metal that strap right to your shoulder. So you will not get shot in the shoulder again thanks to this giant piece of metal we're now selling you. But you're right, the fundamentals are there. One of my funny thoughts is, in the future, like just like when we look at like people doing surgery in the 1800s that didn't wash their hands, they're going to say things like, "Do you mean you would just go to this website and the code would go on your computer and you'd actually run somebody else's code on your computer, your computer? Just run anybody's code. It's like promiscuous computing, like very promiscuous computing you guys had back then." I'm like, yes, we had very promiscuous computing. We were running everybody's code on our machines all the time.
The attack
Um,
surface was different, and the adversarial landscape was different then, right?
right, right,
Back to that frustration and complexity issue. As a sim vendor in my old days, we were always promising people a single pane of glass, right? Every vendor out
right.
there promised a single pane of glass, and most of my customers, when they heard that, in their mind, they're envisioning something like Minority Report, like all the data's there, they take what they want,
Yeah,
they
yeah,
throw
yeah.
away what they don't, and the data just kind of streams at them. And while we've been promising them a single pane of glass, I argue we've been delivering them a single glass of pain, right? Just this
Yeah,
this huge bucket of consoles they have to learn and integrations they have to maneuver. We weren't making it easy for anybody to deploy successfully and safely access to the tooling that they needed. I
right.
hate watching procedural crime dramas where the inspector walks up and he sees a dead body laying there and he says, "I want the ATM film footage from that machine. I want the last 6 months of credit card transactions and 2 years of phone records." And somehow the data's there like that, right? That's just not a realistic environment that
Yeah,
we have to live in. And cybersecurity is all about piecing together all the little components. And not just even cyber, right? Think about end user experience and the tooling we are putting in place to track application and user productivity and response time, right?
yep,
You've got vendors out there that tackle it application by application, right? Embedding code to do application performance monitoring and user history tracking, like how they're using the interface, all of that. You know, in a primarily web dominated world where 65 to 70% of the applications now are delivered as SaaS, and the other ones are some legacy apps you might have to stand up VDI for. It's a very complex, process. But now with web transactional SaaS and the way we're evolving cloud first and cloud centric models, all that can come to a single location, right? The single
yep,
source of truth now for most users is their interactions with the web browser.
yep. Totally true. So there's this whole sort of solution space has been kind of kicking around as this would be a great idea if, and the people have been trying different things. So maybe if you could just take a minute and kind of explain like, we had these sort of, hypervisor based guys like Chromium. Then we had, different sorts of people still trying to create structures. And we have hosted browsers. We have you guys. We have people doing add-ons. Like, can you just kind of get like a taxonomy across that and just maybe explain like how this has worked, where we are, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and why you guys are where you are, and why you think that's the right place.
Absolutely. So we are lucky enough to claim as one of our co-founders a gentleman named Dan Amiga. Dan's claim to fame is he invented the remote browser isolation space with a product and a company called Fireglass that then he sold to our other co-founder Mike Fay, decades ago. And I think he realized the minute RBI became a thing, that RBI was incredibly challenging to deploy, incredibly expensive because of the hosted VMs you have to put up in the cloud to do the rendering, and then you're pixel pushing back down to the end user, which makes a poor user experience. So if you think about the fact that we started trying to evolve the browser into a secure browser with remote browser isolation, even the inventor of that technology knew the minute he launched it, it was down a dead end path, right? Specifically, if you're only looking to address one use case with the browser, and that's just for security. So, fast forward a few years, and remember that the browser technology started in '84. Mozilla was the first browser announced in '84. Netscape came around in '85. We had a ton of evolution. But I think the turning point was when the consumer browser market was uh, was taken over by the likes of ad revenue machines, right? So the browser that we use today in the consumer world is built for one thing, delivering and tracking ads and monetizing the eyeballs sitting in front of it. But that also spawned this movement toward consolidation of code, and more importantly, the release of what is now the second most popular open source project, Chromium, second in popularity only to Apache. And that really started this understanding that the foundational technology of browsing, could then be added on by third parties, right? Chrome is a Chromium release. Edge is based on Chromium. Opera, like all of these started from the Chromium base. But when we looked at that code base, we also realized that it wasn't built to be enterprise grade. First of all, it had all that legacy ad tracking stuff that Chromium had in it to generate ad revenue for vendors. But it also wasn't built with the same concept of reliability, trust, and productivity that I think the enterprise has always demanded. Many of my customers tried building their own browser. They actually had their own browser development initiatives. Those didn't go very far. As you can imagine, it takes a huge level of understanding, but also the code base itself just to build all those enterprise features, became a challenge. So if you jump forward a few years, RBI, which was the secure browser world, that's the Bromiums and the Menlos of the world today, um, still only address a single use case. The minute you start looking at all of the other outlying, actually, I would say very adjacent capability to the enterprise community needs, you start realizing that it's more than just securing the browser that's required. It's also about reducing some of the tech debt as well as the infrastructure complexity and cost that we've been forced to evolve from. No one's saying that ZTNA and CASB and SSE and DLP in its legacy form weren't the right decision at the time. But I think if we were to start over from scratch, and this was our philosophy 4.5 years ago when we started Island, if we were starting from scratch, how would we build it so that we can reduce the complexity, the cost, improve productivity, improve security, not just take it from a singular, we're just trying to build secure browsing, we're trying to build an enterprise workspace that allows you to now adapt and adopt some of these newer technologies or evolve away from legacy ones that may have been the right decision 10 years ago, but may not be the right decision now. So we're seeing many customers saying, how can I consolidate my tech stack? How can I do more vendor consolidation and reduction? Can I get more use out of a singular platform than trying to stitch together this disparate fabric of 8 or 10 different vendors? I'm likely only using 15, 20, 30% of each one, but I've got these massive contracts for my VDI infrastructure and my web gateways and my secure firewall. Like all of that, needed to be reimagined. And I think that's what that's what our goal was 4.5 years ago. And I think our customers are finally saying, you've hit the mark. You've done what we needed, and now it's just a waiting game, right? Gartner says that by 2030, 75 to 80% of enterprises will have adopted an enterprise browser. But you also asked the question about other technology in the space. It's not just the standalone browser vendors that you're hearing from. It's also guys out there saying that I've got an extension and I'll let you install it in your existing browsers. And if you think about the way the Chromium project was built to ensure security and stability, there are certain APIs that are just not able to be exposed in traditional consumer browsers. So no matter how good your extension is in that browser, there are certain APIs that are just not made available to developers. We have an extension that can load, alongside the Island browser, or even in lieu of the Island browser, into those same consumer browser architectures that are Chromium based. And we've managed to achieve about 85 to 90% feature parity between what we can do in the full-blown Island browser and the Island extension. But there's still that little gap of things that you're never going to be able to do in a consumer browser only with an extension. And I'll give you a couple of examples. If you imagine that many customers now are still relying on standalone VPN tools or ZTNA agents in order to establish the connectivity with internally hosted applications, right? That's something that has to exist outside the framework of a browser, right? We did something different with the Island browser. We actually built that into the background service of the browser. And with that background service, even our extension can utilize those same capabilities. So browser extensions are certainly one of the options in the enterprise browser space. But just know there are certain limitations that some vendors are always going to be able to are going to hit that they can't get past.
Yeah. You talked about the different use cases, and I think that like that need for like a super secure thing that kind of was what the remote browser kind of this is the only thing it was kind of good at. But and again, that kind of begs that question, like that need creates like a well, I'm sorry, the user's going to be a little bit mad, but they just have to be because we're doing that. Then there's sort of this corporate use case, this VDI use case, and I kind of want to break them down kind of piece by piece. But in that sort of is that what are you still seeing that same motion that it's mostly this concept of there's a very secure financial transaction website I have to use, so I'm going to use something to get to that. Is that still like you say is your primary use case that you're seeing customers do, or is that an add-on? Like what like is that is that what you're seeing mostly, or is that sort of becoming passe?
So it kind of depends on the customer, the vertical, and the maturity level. And so I have customers in the financial services sector, not large by any nature,
Yeah.
but they've decided to go all in on forcing is the wrong word, encouraging their users to migrate over to the Island browser. And we can do it a number of ways. Make sure that applications can only be accessed from the Island browser. You can do that through conditional access policies in your IDP to ensure that the authentication requests from these applications come from a certain source. You could do it with the extension in the Chromium browsers that say you're trying to get to an application that we have a policy that says you must use in Island. So the nice thing about that gentle bump over into Island is it's not an all or nothing, right? You can carve out and say that for these specific applications, we are enforcing an Island only access policy. And to your point, maybe it's a highly secure financial transaction application. We've got customers in the money lending area that they have people working for them in bodegas, accessing from a machine that this company doesn't own, and they need to provide access to a single application, right? And that is the money lending and money receiving application. You probably know many vendors in this
Yeah.
space. So in that environment, they don't control the asset. They don't have control or policy administration for the user. What they do have is the ability to control strictly the policy of the browser enforcement and the application access of that singular application. So that is one use case that it's not a very large use case. It's solving a very important and very specific need for one customer. Other customers might come to us and say, we're unhappy with our Citrix renewal cost. We know that the majority of the traffic that's going into our VDI is going right back out the door to hit SaaS or web applications. And if you look at the percentage of how much resources consumed by that thick VDI endpoint, when 75% of the traffic is just going right back out the door, many of our customers say, could we shrink our licensing? Could we reduce the resource requirements of our VDI infrastructure? Or they tell us we're already adopting something like AVD or RDS, which means the application's already hosted somewhere else. I just need a path to it. I don't need to stand up an entire architecture of virtual desktops to get there. That's the other really big use case that we find is customers saying, I just can't keep investing in legacy technology like VDI when 75% of the spend is unnecessary given that they're accessing SaaS applications. So those are a couple of key use cases. The other one is digital experience. Again, if I need to track application performance, I can do that with a number of vendors, but it only touches a single application at a time. It's very costly and complex to roll out in mass to your entire application suite. But if we think that most applications today are being accessed by a web browser, that's the perfect spot to do digital experience and application performance tracking. But it's not just how the application's performing, it's also helping the troubleshooting in the help desk of when an application is not performing well for a specific user. having the context to go in and say, well, from the telemetry I'm getting from the browser, I can tell that it's not the web page that's a problem, it's your DNS resolution, or it's the strength of your Wi-Fi signal. Maybe you need to move closer to your hotspot or deploy a better mesh, or you're constantly running at 95% CPU utilization and 100% memory consumption. Maybe it's a resource issue on your box. It's not the application, but it very quickly allows the help desk to say, I know where to target my resolution, and it's not always picking up the phone and calling the application vendor saying, my users are having problems getting to you. Many times it's the user, the host system it's running on, or the other infrastructure that's being used to access that website. So those are some critical ones. I think VDI reduction, digital experience for application performance, and device monitoring, and then just secure SaaS application, where you can guarantee data boundaries. The old world of doing DLP, of tagging files and classifying them and scanning with multiple engines in a break and inspect model, doesn't scale either. So imagine if all that policy was being pushed down and enforced by the rendering engine in the browser, right? As data is being decrypted and before it touches the screen, we can do the scanning there and do things like inline data redaction. We can add things to the screen and take things off the screen with robotic process automation. Simple things like adding a watermark to the background of a sensitive document as it's being viewed at least gives the user a reminder that he's viewing sensitive information. And then if you take it one step further and restrict their ability to move that data outside that application and data boundary by saying you can't save it to your device, you can only save it to a sanctioned secure storage location. You can't print it unless you're printing it to these printers in the office. And you can't inspect the web page and try to exfiltrate data that way. We can do all sorts of things at the presentation layer that just can't be done sitting somewhere in the middle of that transaction in a break and inspect mode.
Yeah, that's awesome. And when you're telling me these features, like coming back to all, seeing the demos and see all this stuff. And I remember thinking as I was looking at this about, these are all cool things. At the same time, I've got to balance that, sort of the user aggravation structure, right? So like you guys have so many features, right? So many options, so many things that can happen. And so how do you kind of help customers navigate? I was thinking about the cookies, right? Like cookies, all the users love their cookies. The cookies are a problem for security issues and poisoning, whatever. So like helping your customers sort of adopt and go into this, are there areas where like, hey, this everyone should turn this on, it doesn't affect anybody and you're going to love it and you're safer? Are there areas where like, well, these are balances you have to, how do you kind of help people evolve into this without users like tossing over the cart?
Yeah, so I think it's some customers choose to do it very slowly, right? Crawl, walk, run. And
Yeah.
crawl could be as simple as silently installing it in the background. We can push the extension down to your existing Chromium-based browsers. We can install through MDM or GPO the application on the device, and then just leave it in the background. And the first thing you get day one is full visibility of all of your user activity. Doesn't affect the user at all, but it definitely gives the owner of the tool, the admins and the CIO, whoever's decided this is of benefit, it gives them full visibility into what their users are doing, how much time they're spending in certain areas, what activity they have in certain applications it solves, or at least gives visibility to shadow IT and shadow AI, so you can start understanding more what the scope of the problem might be. That sometimes is phase one, is just deploy it silently. Don't do any enforcement. Don't push them into an enterprise browser yet, but learn what your environment looks like. So many people just have very limited visibility into that level of granularity. The next one might be offering them the option that says you can run it here in your Chrome with the Island extension, or you can have a better user experience over in Island. And what we've seen so many times is we've chosen deliberately to add a number of productivity tools into the Island browser that encourages users to want to use that browser more. Right? How many times have you copied something into your clipboard, moved along to where you wanted to paste it and realized, I already overwrote that with another copy, right? And then you're going back to the first thing and doing a copy. So very simply, we built a 50 deep clipboard buffer, right? That says you can copy 50 things in, images, screenshots, lines of text, whatever you want. And then you have those 50 saved to go back in and paste them later on. But we added one more thing, and we remember I mentioned this application and data boundary. If I've copied data out of a sensitive application like Salesforce or Workday, and I happen to have pivoted over to a personal application like my own Gmail or an Amazon shopping cart, we're restricting the ability to paste the sensitive data into unsafe environments, paste bin, local clipboard, or notepad, right? We control the data boundary. So even though we've enhanced the clipboard by giving you a larger buffer of things to hold, we also enforce granular data restrictions that don't let you paste sensitive information copied from business tools into unsafe applications. So that's one. Clipboard Manager seems like an
Yep.
easy one. We also looked at the number of extensions that customers were using in their existing consumer browser, and most of the time it was simple things like ad blockers, password managers, cookie management, like all of those things. Grammarly is a great example. Everyone loads Grammarly because no one types properly anymore. Um, and if you think about it, Grammarly is a keylogger, right? It's
Right.
capturing everything you type. It's setting it up to a cloud instance to be evaluated. A verdict is being sent down, and suggestions are being prescribed as you're typing. But there's no guarantee or even right to privacy of that data. You don't know what that data is doing up in the cloud. Even if you've got unless you have an enterprise license of Grammarly that's completely isolated to your own tenant and they've guaranteed data privacy, but most people don't. They just go to the Google Chrome store, they download Grammarly. So what if you could control where extensions run and where they don't? So maybe inside your business applications, we can restrict things like Grammarly, but outside of it, we let it run free when you're typing your personal email, right? That's one thing. So extension management was one thing we added as
Mhm.
a productivity improvement. The clipboard manager, password manager. I can't tell you how many of my customers have a policy against storing passwords, but it's only a loosely enforced policy. And everybody I talk to says, yeah, I save passwords all the time in Chrome or Edge. And it's
Right.
all too easy with tools that are generally available in the open internet, like Sharp Chrome and Sharp Chromium, that allow you to read out all passwords saved in Chrome. So imagine if I could provide you a password manager built in
Right.
that is safe. It also has a kind of a big brother to it, the privilege access management, which allows my team to build secure vaults and share vaults with people so
Mhm.
that I don't have to know the credentials of a site I'm logging into. Those are provided for me in a zero knowledge architecture. So the other things we added to the Island browser to make it more not only intuitive but user friendly, and so that users would want to use it, are these simple productivity tools. Ad blocking means you're going to have a much better user experience. If I load the CNN website in an Island browser and in a Chrome browser without our extension, you'll see a dramatic difference. Half as many web requests being made, half as much memory consumption, half as much bandwidth being utilized, because we're simply stripping out all the stuff that has no right being delivered to a business user. So little things like that, our customers tell us it's a much cleaner, a much more user-friendly experience. I have a better experience loading even my day-to-day applications and websites in the Island browser, that we find more customers trying, their best to move more and more applications over, and the user experience tells us that we're not adding friction. We're not adding any roadblocks that would prevent them from getting their job done. More importantly, we're adding that level of security to not just the business transactions, but also the private ones.
Yeah. I think there's a perception that there's going to be some kind of trade, and I think it's part of it's like you're saying, like there's some of this cut and paste needs to be stopped, some of these things. So you're going to bump into certain things where, you're talking to somebody in the accounting department who's using an application and I'm sorry, yes, we had to turn that off. You can no longer do it that way. Your concept about passwords, that they've saved their passwords in their browser and they really shouldn't have, but they did. Um, so some of that's just that notification of, is that part of your process of just helping people understand how much safer they are? I mean, how do we kind of feed that back to the cyber
Yeah.
teams?
So a lot of that is part of the user experience is also showing the user in real time what the advantages are, right?
Right.
So back to that CNN use case, you can actually drop down a little panel that tells you how many ads were blocked, how many cookies were blocked, how much of the bandwidth was restored, and we actually even calculate how many minutes of the day you've saved yourself by going here with the Island browser. So we try to be very prescriptive and informing the user of what the advantages and the values are. Not every user can really grasp the security value of it. Um,
Right.
but the SOC team can, right?
Right.
Here's a great example. When I was working for an EDR vendor, and then with my SIM history, I know the challenges of a SOC practitioner. In the past, I'd get a stream of telemetry from my EDR that said Chrome.exe launched on this PID, and then nothing. And if I wanted to piece together all of the transactions that maybe put a device or a user at risk as a result of that browsing history, I'd have to go to my web gateway logs. I'd have to go to maybe my VPN logs, my DLP logs. I'd have to piece it all together to find out what happened after Chrome launched, because I don't have that level of visibility. But in an enterprise browser like Island, I have the granularity of knowing that this user who authenticated to your Okta launched Island, opened up this website in this tab, clicked here, typed this information, downloaded this file, and that's the series of events. Like if I have to do root cause analysis in my SOC, I have complete visibility into every transactional and heuristic behavior that user did without having to go and meticulously and painstakingly stitch it together with 4, 5, 6 different log sources. So
Yeah.
while the end user doesn't realize that improved value, the SOC team absolutely does.
Sure. Yeah, it seems like a little easier to go through an island log than to recreate what happened based on packets. Um, but fundamentally, interesting. Um, yeah, I think obviously, like so, we see it evolving. We see people, everyone says this is the future, but to me, I'm a little frustrated by how slow it is. I think, I think and part of it's just the cost effect. Like what everyone right now is not looking for those things. I mean, do you see this more of a cost transition? I mean, are there specific things? Do you see people like not using as much DLP and using this? Or are there other areas you feel like you're assuming the budgets for these other areas because this is a better compensating control? Like a sort of from a customer looking at this from this is a nice to have, not a need to have, and I just don't have the money this year. Like how do you talk to that person about why it makes sense and where it makes sense?
If you had told me 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, that I'd be trying to sell a browser, I
Right.
would
Yeah.
have jokingly said the browser wars are over. They've already
Yeah.
happened and we're
Yeah.
past that. And then I saw a demo of Island a little over a year ago. And it hit me at that time that the founders of this company really had uh, a vision. And that vision was not to displace all of the existing legacy infrastructure and tech. It was to reimagine how that tech is being applied across the board, with a couple of key stakeholders, right? The SecOps team is always one of the stakeholders. Various lines of business become stakeholders, whether it's IT infrastructure, DevOps, and then the end user is also the other stakeholder that we really care about. But yeah, it's been an interesting conversation because in the past, as I've worked for various organizations that sell a product, not necessarily a platform that goes across multiple stakeholder domains, you had one technical buyer to impress, you had one budget to connect to, um, and we're talking about things that span the entire life cycle and breadth of an organization, right? The security team might sit over
Mhm.
here, the CIO governs the budget as a whole for the organization. Um, IT infrastructure is something very different as well. The web and cloud team might be disconnected. The endpoint and digital workplace experience team could be different. So, it's incumbent upon us as an enterprise browser vendor to understand all of those stakeholders, and really, pick a use case that adds the greatest value to at least one, without overlooking the fact that it's probably going to be a bigger opportunity at that organization to get better value realization from the platform long term. I think it's about finding that one use case. Um, and I won't even say it's low hanging fruit. It's not always the
Yeah.
easy ones that are the first use cases we tackle. Sometimes The CIOs will tell us, I need to get my costs under control. My budget's not expanding. And I still have this digital transformation effort underway. My tech debt has increased. I'm looking for ways to consolidate. So, in today's macroeconomic environment too, I think vendor and cost consolidation is one of those critical things that if a vendor can prove that they can deliver the same, if not better outcomes in a smaller form factor with an improved user experience and reduced complexity and cost, that's how the door gets opened. And then you start finding other areas like, oh, so I can also get rid of my secure web gateway with this. Yes, you could. I could also get rid of my ZTNA infrastructure, possibly. Could I get rid of my CASB solution? Yes. So as you start saying yes more, and we want our customers to be able to say yes to their constituents, and luckily we get to say yes to our stakeholders more and more frequently as the platform evolves.
Yeah, I think listen, the whole motion to SaaS changes a lot of the cost model, right? You're paying a lot more for that SaaS solution than you were paying for software 10 years ago because it's all there and because it's structured and there's good reasons for all that stuff. But the way to get the save on that is to stop paying for VDI to get the SaaS, right? The way to get the save is not to keep replicating all that compute inside your organization and take advantage of that. And so to me, when I talk to customers who I know are primarily SaaS type people, right, that have gone through their version of digital transformation and pushed all that stuff to the cloud. This is a way to kind of get the payback on that investment that you're making, right?
Right. There's always that CapEx OpEx model,
Yeah.
and people want to diminish their CapEx spend and deliver a more consistent OpEx model if they can. The board likes it more because it's
Yeah.
it's forecastable. It's tied to the number of users that you have,
Yeah.
and you can equate user growth to your SaaS cost increase, but the value you get out of them, has to align to the displacement of OpEx or CapEx costs that you agreed to. So it's a financial decision as much as a business strategy and outcome decision. And luckily, the vendor space right now, um, and the amount of overlapping spend that our customers have in all of those areas, it's easy for them to say, these two vendors are delivering me, like I'm only 50% deployed with them, but I'm paying 100% of the cost. Are there ways that I could consolidate into a single platform and get the same, if not a better user experience? And that's where we're seeing the most success
Yeah.
is looking at entire architectures and saying, what could we do better? And also what gives you the most pain? And then
Right.
solving that pain problem is the big one.
Yeah. No, I think you've got to have a strong story there. Otherwise, sooner or later, someone looks at this and goes, "Why am I paying for something that I get for free now?" Like, I'm sorry, you want me to get a new browser that I'm paying for? Like, aren't those free? And you obviously have got some work to do there to kind of convince customers that that's uh, a very valid statement. Well, so it's about coming up on 40 minutes here, which is about much time as you normally spend. I know, Ali, if anybody has any questions, feel free to text those to me or chime in with them. But is there anything, Michael, that we, kind of comes up in your line a lot? I had my questions, but is there something that we kind of didn't talk about that you think people should be understanding about this space? Or is there anything, in terms of where the direction is heading?
Yeah. So I think philosophically, one of the most important things about the enterprise browser space is, um, while it's not new technology, it's a new way of thinking about the way the old technology has been used. Um, we frequently get into this rut, and I think you've made this point a couple of times. People have 30 years of learned behavior of how a browser should work and how their applications will work. Um, and they've almost gotten too complacent with status quo, and
Yep.
they just expect that my VPN is going to be a little dodgy at times, and my ZTNA might, not have full connectivity, or I can't get the protocols through, or my web gateway is going to block something that it shouldn't have, and I need to file a ticket to get it, allowed listed. Like we've gotten so accustomed to that I think once users realize that there's a better way of thinking about it. If I were building a new company today, would I ever think about building a huge data center and installing massive server racks to host my application? No, I'd go right to today's most modern capabilities of SaaS delivered applications, containerized workloads, Kubernetes clusters. Like I would think about things in modern terms. Um, New organizations have no problem adopting a technology like an enterprise browser out of the gate. Older organizations that have decades of legacy tech and learned behavior, there's a there's a learning curve there for them to understand the value. I would argue too that Island is not just a singular product, even though our CEO loves to say
Mm.
it's a single product. It is so many things to so many people, but it's kind of this this triple this pyramid of capabilities. Like we are a browser,
Mhm.
we are an extension, and we are a set of services, right? And unless an enterprise is looking at all of those things, I think they're missing the key value of what the enterprise browser can do to revolutionize and modernize application and service delivery.
Again, the browser's taken over. And I don't know what the numbers are, but I remember talking to people in the late '90s and like you're gonna you're gonna be in the browser all the time. Life in the browser, so everything's gonna be in the browser, the browser, the browser, browser. And to some extent, like it's taken longer than everyone thought it was going to take in the late '90s. But the truth is, most everything's in that's SaaS. That is where we live. So
EWAs, right?
yeah,
Outlook, uh,
yeah,
PowerPoint, Excel can launch in a web interface now.
right,
I have customers though that tell me, yeah, I really still love my thick installation of Excel
yeah,
because they have huge macros or custom
yeah,
plugins that require that and can't run in a PWA.
right.
So we recently released a feature that allows us to extend our application and data boundaries down to those thick apps as well. So keep everybody happy. You get to keep
Cool. Yeah.
using Excel in a thick world, but get the benefit of all the last mile controls of the enterprise browser.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Michael. This has been great. I learned a lot as I thought I would. And I really appreciate your time and your energy on this. And anybody who's watching, please reach out to your Gotham reps or anybody at Island if you've got more questions. Michael and I'd be glad to stop by and hang out with you. But thanks, everybody. Thanks, Michael. Good day. Have a good day,
Thank
man.
you, Ken. Appreciate your
Thanks, man.
time.
Bye.